I asked Professor Flint to join me here tonight, and he's right beside me. Terrible set of circumstances.
It is shocking. It is a national emergency, as you rightly say, and it needs urgent action.
Well, you understand the constitutional setup. What is this business about constitutionally the national government can't deal with freight and fodder?
It's extraordinary that the head of a government which takes 80% of the taxes in the country and gives back 40% or 50% to the states, telling them how to spend it, which has accumulated more and more power over the years, over the states, would hide behind federalism as a justification for not taking action in such an emergency. It's very clear that the Constitution gives the Commonwealth the power to intervene now, to declare a state of emergency. This came up during the GFC, when a barrister who's no longer with us, Brian Pape, decided that he didn't like Kevin Rudd sending $900 to dogs and people overseas and dead people and so on, and he challenged that in the High Court. And all of the judges agreed that there is an implied nationhood power, and this was expressed by some judges as one which can be used when there is a national emergency or a great national disaster, when only the Commonwealth can act, when the states can't find the solution. And this is such an occasion. Also, after the Second World War, Ben Chifley and Robert Gordon Menzies, agreeing with him, decided to go ahead with the Snowy River scheme, not a federal area. They decided to go ahead with that under the defence power. And nobody challenged that, because it was really to build up this country against those who would take things from us, to make it a powerful and richer country.
See, only last week we learned that farmers were being spied on, and it was discovered that there were 34 of them, and the pictures were made public on the website, of farmers who had water in their dams. And you said, as if they were in some communist people's republic, they are watched through satellites by the environmental secret police. Shouldn't we know who these environmental secret police are? Which minister gave approval and authority for this to happen? And which department is out there spying on farmers?
Exactly. We have the farmer in Queensland, for example, who was spied on, who was feeding his starving cattle with his own mulga.
Yep.
He was dragged before the courts and fined $110,000. This is extraordinary. I wrote a book a few years ago, Give Us Back Our Country. You did the foreword.
Yes.
And the chapter I wrote after consideration, after seeing what was happening, was, why do they hate our farmers? And it's worse now. They really hate the farmers. They've decided, I think, to get rid of them.
I mean, you couldn't make this up, could you? You couldn't. You see the pictures here. You couldn't make this up. Anyone who sees this would have to say this is a national disaster. The Prime Minister defiantly says, I won't be declaring a national disaster. We're not going to use army trucks. We're not going to go in there. Whereas the farmer no longer has the money. He can't afford the fodder. He can't afford the freight. Malcolm Fraser stepped in. And I might add, when Malcolm Fraser stepped in 1980, the drought was only in Queensland. It wasn't Australia-wide. And he said, this is a national emergency. We've got to throw everything into it. And he did. Now, when you see these pictures and you understand that people are actually dying and taking their lives, and a farmer wrote to me last week, Tuesday, last week, to tell me that he'd gone out to shoot his breeding stock. And he said, I mean, it's hard to say this, but he said, but I've kept one last bullet for myself. I rang the man to try and just say, come on, hang in there, and we got someone out to see him and so on. If this is not a crisis, what is?
It is a crisis. What will happen to these farms? They'll no doubt be bought by foreign interests, probably those ultimately under the control of the Communist Party of China. And the food will be taken. It'll be delivered from Australia to China. It won't even go through our tax system. That's what's going to happen to this country. We will become net importers of food, as we already are in relation to fish, although we have this extraordinary coastline.
Yes, I mean, I've proposed this business about, because we have with students, don't we, higher education loan program. It's currently at about, the indebtedness is currently about $65 billion, and we underwrote the banks in the global financial crisis. They say that the indebtedness of the students will be $180 billion by 2026. if this is in the national interest, we do want to educate, don't we, our best young people, because that is going to help the economy, we hope, although you and I would doubt whether the nature of the education at the moment is something we approve of, but that's for another day. But then in the global financial crisis, we can't afford the banks to go under. Presumably, therefore, if we're not prepared to underwrite the farming industry, we can afford for the farming industry to go under.
Your system, your proposal is brilliantly simple because you don't start paying back until you get something a little over 50,000 a year. And it's easy to administer. It's done in relation to all of the students. Your system is excellent, and it could be extended to cover, for example, outstanding mortgages. They could be bought at a discount from the banks. And one thing I think they ought to do is they ought to take back, they ought to expropriate the water they gave to people who don't own land.
Well, I want to raise that with you because that's that National Water Initiative from 2004. The notion that people could buy up water when they haven't even got a tablecloth of land and wait until you are in desperate need and jack up the price and boast about it in the balance sheet.
It's extraordinary, and it is immoral. And it's just contrary to the good interest, the right interest of Australia and certainly of the farmers.
I had a letter today, I'm trying to find it here, from just late this afternoon, from a fellow who said to me that he was a water engineer and he'd been visiting America, and someone said to him in America, please explain what these environmental flows are. And he said, we're the only country in the world that has these environmental flows. And when he explained this to his American people, who are also water experts, they said, thank God we don't have something like that here. I mean, it defies common sense, doesn't it, that you could actually have a preference for environmental flows. The Murray-Darling has survived thousands of years, hasn't it?
Exactly.
You know, have environmental flows ahead of the need for the farmer. I mean, Susan Lee, at least, when we begged her, released that water. But it's just people watching us here tonight think, what the hell is going on?
Exactly. It's absolutely appalling. And to do it exactly at the time that they need it is even worse. They should be releasing it.
But, you know, we're talking about the mental and emotional trauma of these people, and you can imagine, here is a farm. You and I are on the farm, and just over there is the Murray River. It's overflowing, and the water's there, and they can't touch it. And we've got the environmental police watching them in order to prosecute them, just like Dan McDonald feeding his starving cattle on mulga. $110,000 before the courts, and no one wants to know about it. Where do you think we're heading?
I think we're heading to a disaster. We're going to end up as a net importer of food. We've lost our manufacturing, that's all going. Mining is objectionable. We have people out in the street saying that you can't mine, even though where it's very safe to mine. What's going to be left for this country? There'll be nothing left. We will be like the Argentina of the South Seas. We will go down, and it will be a terrible result for the whole country. We already do it in relation to fishing. We have this enormous coastline, and yet we're importing more fish than fish produced here. In other words, the foreign fleets are coming into our waters, no doubt, and taking our fish because the governments won't allow our fishermen to fish them.
Well, when Scott Morrison was Treasurer, he signed off the whole dairy herd in Tasmania to China. So now we have plane loads of Tasmanian milk going to China every week from our paddock onto their plate. Good to talk to you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Keep at it. Professor Flint's article is in this week's Spectator magazine. Outstanding piece of writing.